The foundation stones were never the point. They're the preparation. The point is the storm. Every man is going to face storms, loss, change, things falling apart, things that actually work out really well, but are major changes in life. In a short period of time, I lost my first marriage, I lost my military career, then I lost my grandfather, and then a longtime childhood friend died. I was 29, and I had no idea how to face any of it. Up to this point, we've spent a lot of time building what the 7 foundation stones are. The circle of support, the spiritual practice, reflection, learning, rest, having a mentor, focusing on your health. This video is where I tell you what all of those things are for. Like a lot of guys, I've lived through many storms, but I got almost nothing out of them for years, and there's a specific reason why. What it took me decades to understand is that storms are not the enemy. You actually need them. Let me take you back to that worst run of my life and what I did with it. In 1992, I was 25 years old. After 22 months of marriage, it ended in divorce. I was $15,000 in debt. 6 months later, the military didn't need me anymore, so I lost my military career and switched over to computer programming. A whole new world, a whole different sense of pressure and performance. In 1995, shortly after I married Lori, I lost a grandfather who was very important to me. And then a year later, a friend from my childhood died. He was 29 years old. He and another guy were consistent friends through high school and college. And a year earlier, when my grandfather had died, my friend was sick too. They both had cancer. And my friend had called me and he thought for sure he was going to die, but then my grandfather passed. And then a year later, my friend died. At the time, I made it pretty spiritual. I was very invested in church activities. There were emotions, but I don't know that I really felt it the way that I could have or should have. While we weren't deeply connected at the time, it was still somebody who had been there for me at a critical part of my life. The way that I dealt with the pain was to dress it up in spirituality, was to ignore my pain and talk about, well, he's in a better place and he's feeling relief and he doesn't have to deal with his stuff. And while all of that is true, it didn't help me deal with my own feelings about it. So I wiped away the pain by making it the right Christian response to death, instead of really feeling the loss of somebody who had been important to me in my life, who had been there for me when my own life didn't make much sense. And many times I had regret over the fact that I didn't go to see him. I didn't know how sick he was. And even when the year before he had told me that he was probably going to die, I, again, didn't think much of it. I didn't bother to go see him. It's complex emotions, the emotion of abandoning a friend when he was sick, of feeling the loss of somebody who was significant in my life, and really not knowing how to do anything with it other than to make it another signal of my Christian behavior, of how well I was doing with his loss. None of that helped me to process it. None of it helped me to really deal with it. Any one of those events is a real storm. In a short period of time, they seem to stack on top of one another. But what I want you to notice about who I was at that time, I really had no circle of support. I had no mentor. I barely had any spiritual practice. I had no idea how to rest, and I had no practice of reflection. So what did I do with all of that pain and those storms? I ran. I went to television, computers, books, gaming, porn. None of it was taking me anywhere. It was just another way of turning up the volume, and it was turned up loud enough that I didn't hear the losses. And something that I learned out of that, a thing nobody told me, when you hide from these storms, the storm is still waiting for you. You're going to have storms in your life. And the good news is you'll survive most of them. The bad news, you can survive a storm and get nothing from it. No lesson, no growth, no change. I'm proof. I lived through all of that and came out the other side the same man, just more numb. And then the next storm comes, another loss, not because you did anything wrong. Life just has loss in it. And the only consistent thing in life is change. You'll get older, jobs will come and go, people will come into your life, and sadly, people will die. My plan for all of this was just hoping that nothing bad would actually happen. That was my plan for years. Having no plan and not planning to make anything different is really not a very good plan. Not handling those storms wasn't even the worst of it. Probably the worst part was a story I kept telling myself about who was at fault in all that happened. For years after my divorce, I needed it to be her fault, anybody's fault but mine. And I played that story out over and over again in my head. The same thing with the military. I wanted it to be somebody else's doing, nothing to do with my attitude, nothing to do with my immaturity, and nothing to do with my lack of follow-through. There were events that led up to the military needing to let people go, but I also was not that committed to my role. The story that I would tell most people is about how the military was not very detailed in their review of people, and so it was simply picking a bunch of records and deciding to keep this guy and to let this person go. It was a very disconnected way of blaming the Army for my loss. And the reality is, I was not that good at what I was doing. I many times would rather do my own thing than do what the Army was asking me to do. Yes, there were things that were unfair. Yes, there were things where they did not see my reality. But to take responsibility for it and stop playing the victim that, oh, well, I just got overlooked, or the military is very disconnected from some of their younger officers, that kind of thing. The reality was I wasn't the guy to keep, and I didn't want to have that conversation. I played that story out over and over, how, yes, I should have been able to stay. I just didn't because I was overlooked, as opposed to, no, they were really looking at me, and there were some definite holes in my records and some things that I could have done differently. And certainly my attitude and my performance impacted my overall career. That's one of the reasons why I got nothing out of those storms. I was too busy being the victim to ask the one question that mattered, the question nobody asked, because I didn't have that circle. I didn't have those people around me. I didn't have somebody to say, well, yeah, those are real things, but what was your role in it? Now, I will say some losses are really somebody else's fault, real abuse. That's not on you, and it still has to be worked through. But both of those things are true. One of the things that I learned being in recovery is that, number one, addicts and resentment are not a good combination. But the antidote to that resentment, that anger that I had toward other people, the military, whoever, the antidote to that is grief. You have to actually grieve what you lost. I had to grieve what I lost. And sometimes what you're grieving is a future that you'll never have. I had to grieve the life I would have had if I could have stayed in the military. I know men who got to live that life. I didn't. I threw it away. I couldn't grieve until I admitted that these were real losses and that they genuinely hurt. So when the storms of life cost this much, you might think the answer is to avoid them. It's really the opposite that's true. Not every storm is a disaster. Marriage, a new career, becoming a father, those are different types of storms. They're good ones, but they can still be hard and they still involve a whole lot of change. And so I'm not telling you that all change is pain. I'm telling you change is a storm, and you can face it or you can run from it. Something that helped me a long time ago is to realize that the only place the sun shines every single day is in the desert, and nothing grows in the desert. We need storms. It's how we grow. It's how we get stronger. It's how new life comes in. You have to actually be in them to be present. You can't run away. You can't hide. You can't keep distracting yourself. Just today, I heard a line from a researcher named Edith Grotberg, who spent her career studying this. She defines resilience as the human capacity to deal with, overcome, learn from, or even be transformed by the inevitable adversities of life. Think about that phrase for a second. To be transformed by these things. Not just survive adversity, to be changed by it. That's the difference between the man who gets nothing from the storm and the man who grows through it. Also notice that word inevitable. She's saying the same thing that I've been saying through this whole video and through this whole series. Storms are coming no matter what. The only question is what they make of you. Being storm ready doesn't mean you won't get hurt. If someone tells you it won't hurt, they're selling you a delusion. You're selling yourself a delusion if you think, I have to go through this without pain. But what being storm ready does is it helps you develop a rhythm, a process, a way to stay grounded and present and connected while it's happening. That's what the stones are for. Having that circle of support, a mentor, reflection, rest. They're what let me finally grieve instead of run. That's the whole point. 30 years later, all of those things still happen to me. The difference is I've grieved them and let them go instead of continuing to carry those resentments with me for the rest of my life. So here's something I want you to do this week. Name one loss that you never actually grieved. Maybe you lost a job. Maybe somebody died in your life. Maybe it is about a future that you didn't get to have. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to solve it. Just name it. Write it down. That's one of the places where it starts, is acknowledging that we've been hurt. Next time we're going to start talking about the specific storms, and I'm going to be naming some of them one by one. We're going to start with the storm of loneliness. If you want to be storm ready, go to stormreadymen.com and take the assessment. If you're married, send your wife to the Couple Cure.